Live on News 24, you're watching Sharri.
Good evening. Tonight, why Pauline Hanson needs security and bodyguards just to campaign on Australian streets. Plus, it would be a grave mistake for the Royal Commission to ignore Islamic extremism and focus on protest laws. I'll discuss this with the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. And the explosive trial against Alan Jones begins with an athletic star accusing him of kissing and touching without consent. More on that shortly. But first tonight, former Prime Minister John Howard has entered the debate over immigration and Australian culture as Pauline Hanson surges ahead in the polls and today unveiled her Victorian team. Howard, as you know, famously declared this in 2001.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
But now he's pushing back against Pauline Hanson's call for a monoculture. He says, "I frankly do not know what monoculture means in the context of immigration. To some, it apparently means a mixture of people of different ancestries bound together by a common Australian citizenship. To others, it can mean an uncompromising refusal to accept any deviation from a pre-established Australian identity." But Howard doesn't endorse multiculturalism either, and he believes it's failed in Australia. I've had the conversation with him on a number of occasions. The reason it has failed is not because of the vast majority of migrants who've brought the best of their foods and culture to Australia while happily and gratefully embracing the Australian way of life. The point at which multiculturalism falls apart is radical Islamism. And John Howard appears to acknowledge this when he says, "The other important constraint has been that existing citizens do not want new arrivals bringing their homegrown hatreds and enmities to this country." Well, radical Islamism has been the downfall of multiculturalism not only in Australia, but in large parts of Europe. And it's because of threats associated with this ideology that Pauline Hanson now needs almost constant security wherever she goes. My understanding is that she has Australian Federal Police bodyguards protecting her. And my colleague Chris Kenny asked her about security and the situation of the protests at her press conference today.
There's an enormous amount of security around this event today. How concerned are you about the ability of One Nation to campaign freely in the Victorian state election?
It is going to be tough, but there's still a lot of support out there. People want to see us. And these people, you know, they understand what it's like out in the streets, and I'm sure they've received a lot of support from their family and friends.
Well, isn't it a sorry state of affairs when Pauline Hanson needs almost full-time security because the threats against her are so intense on Australian streets? The Albanese government has done almost nothing to ensure that people who embrace extremist ideology are prevented from coming to Australia. And it's the ideology behind the spate of recent terror attacks around the world, allegedly including the attack at Bondi. And it's one of the reasons One Nation is soaring in the polls. They only had a 6% primary around that at the last election. As Barnaby Joyce has said, their upsurge in support came after the Bondi attack. That was when Australians woke up to the devastating impact that radical Islamism may have on our shores. Its ideology is incompatible with Australian customs, democracy, and our Judeo-Christian values. It's also incompatible with Australian law. Its most extreme adherents advocate Sharia law, forced child marriage, female genital mutilation, and violence against non-Muslims. And this ideology has been on full display at many pro-Palestinian rallies where terror flags are flown, including on the Harbour Bridge, a rally that, as you'll recall, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese praised. And 2 days after the barbaric attacks on civilians in Israel, A vigil at the Opera House was abandoned amid scenes of extremist hatred. And now, just this week, starting tomorrow, an anti-Semitism Royal Commission will examine those scenes. But it's focusing on the right to protest. Here's what the Royal Commission says it will examine on its website: the democratic function played by protests, hateful conduct that can occur in the context of protest activity, how police respond to protests. Now, this reminds me a little bit of the immediate response after the Bondi attack, when Anthony Albanese announced new gun laws, but failed to take action on anti-Semitism. As Josh Frydenberg pointed out at Bondi that week, guns were not the underlying issue. It was radical Islamism that pulled the trigger.
Guns may have stolen the life of 15 innocent civilians, but it was radical Islamist ideology that pulled the trigger. And if you, Prime Minister, can't say those words, Islamist ideology, if you can't speak them, you can't solve them.
I mean, this strikes me as the same mistake all over again. Now, the Royal Commission has been doing great work. I commend it. But I wonder whether the Royal Commission is approaching this issue from the wrong direction. Protest laws are not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is radical Islamism. This isn't a debate about the right to protest. It's about allowing an extremist ideology to take hold in Australia and seeing that ideology expressed openly at protests. And just a reminder, look at the deeply un-Australian chants at the Opera House rally that night.
Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Allah!
Well, this hatred continued to escalate over the subsequent 2 years until gunmen opened fire at Bondi Beach, leaving 50 people shot and 15 killed, including, of course, a child. Now, that hatred that began at the Opera House was normalised and excused under the banners of freedom of expression in the name of multiculturalism. And that is precisely the issue. This is not merely about protest laws. It's about allowing migrants into the country who believe that Jews and Zionists and, well, any non-believers should be killed, who chant extremist slogans while flags are burnt at the Opera House and who seek to harm their fellow Australians. This is dangerous, criminal conduct that, in my view, incites hatred and has no place in Australia. So if there is now widespread support for Pauline Hanson's call for a monoculture, well, that reaction is understandable, because the Albanese government hasn't lifted a finger to deal with radical Islam and the multitude of problems it causes. And it would be a grave mistake for the Royal Commission this week to ignore the ideology underpinning anti-Semitism and instead focus on protest laws. Now, I'll come back to that a bit later, but first now, let's turn to the Alan Jones trial. And the first witness has taken stand today, testifying the former broadcaster kissed and touched him without his consent while he was a rising athletic star. Jones has pleaded not guilty to all 22 charges, and here's the latest, thanks to 9 News.
Alan Jones could always draw an audience on radio.
Mr Jones, how are you feeling this morning?
But this is different. The crowd, a throng of reporters and camera crews.
Mr Jones, are you ready for your day in court?
Greeting not a broadcaster, but an alleged sexual predator. The 85-year-old, frail, but insisting he's innocent. Plaintiff Jay was the first of 6 alleged victims to give evidence. A champion athlete, he met Jones as a teenager, The court heard the broadcaster allegedly bought him a mobile phone, a car, and gifted him $400, $500 and then $600 a week. You've been a really good boy. I'm going to give you some more money. In another incident, the broadcaster allegedly squeezed the complainant's penis, calling it impressive.
And Alan Jones's barrister, Gabrielle Bashir, told the court that rivalry, treachery, double-dealing, money, hatred, desperation and more were at the heart of the case. And she said Jones had faced a trial by media and claimed that his media rivals, including Ray Hadley, were to blame for spreading stories to destroy him. And of course, Ray Hadley will join me on the show a bit later, as he always does every Monday. OK, let's turn now to the other big stories today, and let's bring in former Labor MP Michael Danby and former Labor State Secretary Cameron Milner. Great to see you both. Look, I'm going to return to John Howard's comments a bit in a moment, but I want to start with One Nation today announcing its candidates in the upcoming Victorian election. Some interesting names unveiled, including Daniel Andrews' former bodyguard, Chris Burson, also the animator Mark Nicholson, who's been responsible for their viral cartoons. And the party's going to be led by the state party president in Victoria, Warren Pickering.
It's not lost on us the gravity of this undertaking in Victoria. It's really not. As the boss alluded to, we are on the precipice of social and economic collapse, and anybody who doesn't believe that is simply not paying attention. As such, we've engaged in a concerted effort to cultivate talent from within the community. We are of the firm belief that it's politicians that got us into this mess, and we're sure as hell not going to leave it to politicians to get us out.
I mean, Cameron, Victoria is traditionally a very progressive state. So do you think One Nation has, well, do you think their prospects are as good in Victoria as they might be in New South Wales or Queensland?
Well, no, I don't. But the polls say that One Nation will do well in Victoria. So look at the polls, to get the information here. What's fascinating to me is that the leader of One Nation is going to run for Pakenham, which is the most marginal seat. It was a Jess Wilson seat she had to win back to get the 16 seats she needs to get to unseat now Ben Carroll as the Premier of Victoria. And One Nation's now in that race. So each of these contests are going to become three-horse races. And that makes it a much more difficult task for a majority government from either side to be formed. And that, I think, that's the challenge for Victoria. They've got, a situation where Labor can actually get up to 7 or 8 seats with the Greens and be a minority government with the Greens. And the coalition now staring down the barrel of One Nation winning seats in Victoria and forcing them into minority government and forcing them into governing with One Nation support. That's the choice on the table for Victorian voters in about 15 weeks' time.
Then at the federal level, Michael, I mean, the worry for those who dislike the Albanese government is that the rise of One Nation will divide the Conservative vote even further. And look, some are saying it'll guarantee another Labor term.
Well, Sharri, you're right. You simply can't add the One Nation vote and the coalition vote together, which is about 50% now, and say that they're going to win. I expect One Nation's main effect, both in Victoria and in eventually in the federal election, to be in the upper house. That's why Pauline announced the 12 for the Victorian upper house today, and I expect that they might get up to a dozen in the Senate eventually when we have the federal election. But One Nation, I think, will run behind the Liberals here. Jess Wilson has become a more impressive candidate, the leader of the Liberal Party, and I expect One Nation's preferences to flow quite strongly to the coalition, and them to if they don't win in their own right, they'll be pretty close to it.
Look, before Pauline's big announcement of her Victorian candidates today, she actually blocked the ABC, The Guardian and The Age from attending the press conference. Here's what she had to say when she was defending this decision.
I'm sorry, that democracy doesn't happen on the ABC at all. And I'm sick of it's not fair and just in their reporting. So if you want to criticise and have a go at me not putting the truth across, you're not giving me the truth of democracy either.
Now, Cameron, look, I openly can say that I dislike The Guardian, and I agree that ABC's reporting is often biased, but I think it is a dangerous precedent to exclude media outlets or journalists you don't like from press conferences. I mean, I think the Donald Trump approach is much better. Have all the journalists there, call out their questions if you don't agree with them. What do you think?
Oh, look, I agree. I mean, if you want freedom of expression, you have freedom of the press. I mean, it's a pretty fundamental sort of cornerstone of our democracy. And Pauline simply excluding people and locking people out doesn't allow the situation to have where the Guardian's reviewers should have to watch Pauline. The ABC viewers should actually have to listen to what Pauline Hanson's got to say. They shouldn't be shielded in their little cafe latte sets like this. No, I mean, the situation is Pauline should be there for anyone from the press gallery to ask any question. And to your point, deal with it like Trump. Take the journo on, rebut the comment, don't lock them out.
You know, and as much as I don't like those media outlets, Michael, I do think scrutiny is important. You know, have the transparency, have the sunlight. If you've got nothing to hide, then why does it matter having a couple of hostile journalists when she can handle them? We know she can handle them.
And as the Donald has shown, speaking to the actual journalists is sometimes an easier job than some of the compares. That's where the ABC is shockingly biased. I'm deeply pessimistic about them. I cannot believe that interview that Chris Kenny did with Kim Williams. How could you say that the anti-American correspondent that they've got in Washington, John Lyons, wasn't biased, or Sally Sarah, or so many of the other compares that they have? So I think it's easier to take on the journalists who tend to be more junior and a bit fairer, but it's the compares at the ABC that are a dead loss.
I mean, this isn't about press conferences, but I mean, Anthony Albanese, hasn't come on my show ever. Well, not since 2018. Pauline Hanson won't go on ABC programs. So I guess it's not dissimilar to that. You know, the politicians always pick the journalists they like and they go do interviews with them. That's, I guess, just the way it is in the Canberra Press Gallery. All right, let's turn back to my editorial where John Howard criticised Pauline Hanson's push for a monoculture. And he wrote in The Australian that much political discussion of immigration today is beset by a pointless debate about whether we should call it monocultural or multicultural. And he's arguing that most Australians regard this as quite pointless simply because they have long favoured a steady immigration stream subject to it not imposing too great a strain on our infrastructure, especially housing. Cameron, I think this argument might have changed. I think because there is such a housing crisis now, people do want to see the levels of migration lowered. What do you think?
Well, I think it's very populist. I think what Pauline Hanson's done and said at the press gallery was all about a huge amount of attention to her and One Nation's cause. But you've got to take the view of John Howard, in its measure. I mean, John Howard actually made migration and borders a political tool. He weaponised it. So he knows how to do this and has done that for electoral success himself in 2001. So no, I think the interesting thing from John Howard, who's actually now a statesman, is actually making the point that we are a very different nation. We're not just a white Aryan race the way some in One Nation want it. We are genuinely multicultural. We celebrate the fact that people come from all over the world peacefully to live in our community, and we should celebrate obviously those from radical Islam who want to come and destroy our society, and the one that we share so freely with so many people. So to put John Howard's point, we are multicultural. We should celebrate that. The immigration levels in terms of matching housing, yes, that's creating tensions out there. And Pauline Hanson, I think, is using that to run a very different and more vile argument about it being a white nation rather than One Nation.
Michael, what do you think? I mean, putting the numbers aside because of the cost of living crisis and the housing crunch, I mean, multiculturalism hasn't failed, has it, apart from radical Islam? Do you agree?
John Howard is a genuinely pluralist bloke. A business friend of mine once asked me to a bar mitzvah where I watched him doing the horror where everyone holds each other's hands with a whole bunch of Jewish grandmothers. And certainly his chief of staff, Arthur Sinodinos, who's a great former ambassador, Greek-Australian, is one of the best civil servants I've ever had to deal with. But it's the level of migration and the nature of that migration that are legitimate topics of debate and which we should stick to. And you stick to it, and Cameron sticks to it, and we should get Pauline and Angus and even Albo to stick to it. Those are the topics, the level of immigration and the nature of that immigration. I don't want any more refugees unchecked from Gaza, nor do I want Dr. Jihadi to come back to Australia.
Absolutely, completely agree. But the polls, I mean, while Pauline and One Nation, their primary is much stronger than the Coalition. I mean, the polls today are showing that on a two-party preferred basis, the Coalition is ahead of Labor by 4 points. So, Cameron, I mean, based on this, and very hard, of course, to poll because we just don't know how the preferences will flow, but based on this, do you think we could be looking at a coalition federal government come the next election?
Well, I think that's on the table, and you know, Albo hasn't really got an answer to One Nation, hasn't really got an answer to the fact that he is still running a weak, lying government at its foundations. And the last budget was a disaster, total disaster. On top of the 3 interest rate rises to go and attack people's wealth across Australia and destroy housing prices. You know, it's a terrible, terrible budget that Albo's brought down. So little wonder there's a run on the Labor primary vote, and it's getting to the levels now where Labor can't actually, you know, sit back and say, oh, we're going to win anyway. To your point, Michael, I think it's you know, it's getting competitive out there. If Albo stays leader and does what he's continuing to do, it may well end up like Starmer in the UK. You can have a lot of parliamentarians, but once you lose the popular vote in the polls, then the parties start to move.
Look, I wish it would end up like Starmer, but I can't see any sign of that happening. He seems to have so much power and popularity among his fellow MPs. Michael, tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I don't think you are. I think that 93 seats is a sort of big base to start from. And if any government deserves to be defeated, it's this federal government. But as I've said previously, I think the impetus will come from Victoria. Angus Taylor will have to look to Jess Wilson to see if she wins better in her own right. I think that Ben Carroll has got a bit of a boost, so that was a smart thing of Labor to remove the very, very unpopular Jacinta Collins in time. And if they do well in Victoria, that may set them up for a recovery in nationally. The problem is One Nation preferences, and will they go to the Coalition? A lot of them are Labor voters and won't want to go to Conservative, Liberal, National Party opposition.
All right. Michael Danby, Cameron Milner, great to see both of you. And we will come back to the economy and the crashing property market a bit later with Ray Hadley. But now a shocking new report has revealed that 2025 was the deadliest year for Jewish people living outside of Israel in over 30 years. The J7 report by the Anti-Defamation League noted that 20 people were killed in anti-Semitic attacks across the world last year. And of course, 15 of those on our turf at Bondi. And Australia, in fact, had the highest rise in anti-Semitic incidents, increasing by 270% over the past 5 years. This is followed by Germany with a 215% rise, the United States, France as well, 124% rise. And joining me to discuss this now is the world-renowned Anti-Defamation League Chief Executive Officer, Jonathan Greenblatt, a former White House advisor who's visiting Australia at the moment. Jonathan, thank you so much. Wonderful to have you here.
What an honor it is for me to be on your show. I just so appreciate your boldness and your leadership. Thank you.
Oh, that's so kind. And we're all very grateful to have you here because, you know, as your statistics show, Australia's been having a really tough time with the rise in hatred, anti-Semitic attacks, violent crime on our streets over the past, 2.5 years now.
Yeah, look, let's be clear. Since October the 7th, anti-Semitism, a hatred against Jewish people or the Jewish state, has been on the rise across the world, particularly in liberal democracies like America or the UK, France or Australia. And yet it's Australia that has had the most marked rise. As you said, up 270%. And if you look at the ratio of violent anti-Semitic incidents, it's up 5 times as much in Australia as it is in any of those other countries.
It's been such a shock to us because we have been such a relaxed country, you know, known as the lucky country. Well, you know, what would you say to our political leaders, to our Prime Minister? What do they need to do to try and get on top of this?
Yeah, look, I think what I've learned being back in Australia, this is my 3rd visit to the country, is Jewish Australians, they just want a fair go. They just want to be treated like everyone else, not, again, different rights, just equal rights. And that means being protected. That means not being assailed and attacked for their identity. But yet we've seen this terrible rash of incidences, as you know, in businesses, synagogues, people's homes, and of course that tragedy in Bondi Beach. So what I would say to politicians, they were way too slow after the attack to act, but now you have this Royal Commission. And what I think your political leadership needs to understand is this isn't just an Australian issue. This is a global issue. The whole world, Sharri, is watching what happens here in Australia. The whole world wants to see, will this Royal Commission deal with the problem effectively and exhaustively? That's what we are hoping to see.
And by the way, we had to really push. It was a 4-week fight.
For sure.
To even get the Royal Commission up. Now, as I said at the start of the show, the Royal Commission, starting on tomorrow, has a dedicated hearing block where it's going to examine protest activity, including the Opera House rally.
Yeah.
But what concerns me is when I looked at what they're actually going to be examining, it's protest laws, not, you know, the trigger that pulled the gun, as Josh Frydenberg said, not the Islamism that is the real issue at the heart of this.
Look, at the ADL, we fight for some basic rights which we share with you here in Australia, like freedom of speech or freedom of expression. But freedom of speech isn't the freedom to slander people. And freedom of expression definitely is not the freedom to incite violence. So I do think it's fair to say, when you call them protests, it almost sounds anodyne or generic. But these are not protests, they're provocations. These aren't activists. The people you showed at the top of the show, those are antagonists with masked faces calling to kill the Jews and kill the Zionists and worse. So you're right. I hope this Royal Commission will move past sort of the pablum and focus on what's really the cause here. Who are the culprits? What is the ideology? And what are you going to do to wrestle it down to the ground?
I mean, when you saw those scenes from the United States, because on that night, you know, monuments all around the world were lit up in blue and white in solidarity with the victims who were killed by Hamas. When you saw those scenes, you know, that stain on the Opera House.
It was shocking. And it was shocking to see the authorities, when one man brought his flag, that rather than stop the people who were threatening violence against him, they arrested the Jewish man.
Yeah.
That was a stain that left an indelible mark on all of us around the world who watched that. So right now, I think Australia's at a pivot point. And the question is whether this Royal Commission will release a set of recommendations that will actually address the issue, or will it sweep it under the rug? And then once you have those recommendations, does the government have the courage to implement them? And that's what I think we want to see to ensure that the government and the country, you know, is held accountable. That's what we would expect.
I do have confidence that the Royal Commission will achieve something.
Good.
But what I'm not confident about is the fact that what is underpinning the terror attacks, not just in Australia, but I mean, the recent spate we've had is radical Islamism, is this extremist ideology, the sympathy with ISIS and other terror groups. And, you know, how does anyone address that? Because people can be radicalized so quickly.
Well, look, I think something that's important to point out, the pro-ISIS, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Iran crowd, it's not just anti-Semitic, although they are. They don't just want to murder Jews, although they do. They are anti-Western, they're anti-capitalist, they're anti-democratic. Again, it's not just a threat to the Jewish minority, it's a threat to the majority of people in these countries. So again, I think this fight against radical Islam, this is a fight against hate that should concern everyone. Doesn't matter where you pray, or how you vote, or where you're from. It is a danger, a clear and present danger that would, again, touch us all.
I mean, your figures show that the United States at 131%, I think, around that rise in anti-Semitism over the past 5 years. And yet New York City elected Zoran Mamdani. I'm told the Jewish community even voted for him in New York. I don't understand how that happened. You know, how much damage is he now doing?
Well, look, Zoran Mamdani is indeed incredibly troubling. Let's be clear, we don't know exactly how many Jewish people voted for him. I think his backers, his partisans have an interest in exaggerating that number.
Right.
The reality is, you talk to Jewish New Yorkers today and they are alarmed. Anti-Jewish hate crimes are up. Anti-Jewish attitudes are up in the city with the largest Jewish population of any city in the world outside of the state of Israel. I mean, New York is, again, not just sort of the capital, the commercial capital of our country, it's sort of the Jewish capital. And so it's very worrisome. So again, we have a mayor who talks about globalizing the Intifada. But can I tell you something?
Unbelievable. Because globalizing the Intifada is what you saw, is what we all saw at Bondi.
I walked Bondi Beach today. I talked to survivors today. I wrapped tefillin today. And I saw with my own eyes what globalizing the Intifada looks like. But as you alluded to, I've also seen that in New York. I've seen it in London. I've seen it in Paris. I've seen it in Berlin. And none of it is acceptable. And so, look, I think all of us need to steel ourselves for this fight, because it is the fight. It's the fight of our lives.
Very quickly before we go, I'm also troubled by, the rise on the far left of the Democrat Party of anti-Semitism and then on the far right of the MAGA movement, the likes of Tucker Carlson and his buddies.
Tucker Carlson is offensive, isn't even the word for it. So, but what you're pointing out really matters. Anti-Semitism is an equal opportunity offender. We've got to address it no matter what political party it comes from, no matter what ideological, it's political Islam. Again, right-wing extremism or left-wing radicalism. All of it's a threat. All of it needs to be confronted.
Yeah, I'm very worried. I mean, it's fine now under Trump. I suppose you served in we've really got to move on, but you served in the Obama White House. Funny thing to say that it's probably the best now under Trump, because if the Democrats get in, you don't know about what that left-wing element will do, and you don't know if there's a future president aligned with this MAGA movement as well.
All of it could be alarming. That's why, again, it's not a Jewish fight. It's not a Republican or Democrat fight. It's all of our fight.
Yeah. All right, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, still to come, the government's property tax changes crushing the economy, and speculation mounts that Karl Stefanovic and Karl Sandilands could be joining forces. Plus, Tony Abbott launches a stinging attack on the corruption watchdog. Ray Hadley disagrees, and he'll be here after the break. Thanks for tuning in, and joining me now, as always on a Monday, radio legend Ray Hadley. Ray, great to see you.
Lovely to see you.
Now,
Ready to get through.
I know so much news at the moment. Now, I want to start with this ICAC corruption inquiry. Now, Tony Abbott has come out and he said that there seems to be a level of incredulity directed against people's Christianity. And he says his main problem is the factional weaponisation of what's supposed to be an instrument of justice. He said he's surprised the ICAC has allowed itself to be caught up in an internal party squabble.
I have the utmost respect for the former Prime Minister. I've known him for over 30 years. I've always thought that he, in the main, was a good, decent man. But if he thinks this is about an internal party squabble, he's way off target. He's also suggesting, because of this Christianity factor, it's inescapable that a number of the main proponents of this deal with Nassif, who's a thief hiding in Lebanon, went to the same college, Redfield College in Dural in Sydney Northwest, which is an Opus Dei college. Now, and they have a role to play, and it's a good college. I know plenty of people who went there, but it is a coincidence that some of the proponents of this, attempt to garner money from this thief Nassif and then hand it around to try and get councils out and get their people in, as they tried to with Susan Lee in the southern part of the state. I just remind Tony Abbott of this, right? Because I've lived this for 10 years, as you know. I was the first one to identify Nassif as a thief. Now,
and he sued you. And he sued you, just to remind him. He sued you. Yeah.
And he didn't win. But anyway, we have tens of thousands of young people and older people living in defective apartments. And that was done by Nassif with the help, allegedly, of Liberal Party operatives. We have tradesmen who are owed millions of dollars, plumbers, electricians, tilers, really hard-working, decent people, while Nassif is swanning it in Lebanon with money that he no doubt channelled out of the country before, he absconded. And for Tony Abbott to suggest this is all about some sort of squabble, he's not reading it right. He's not reading the room. And those people who have admired you for a long time, Tony, for standing up for those sort of people, workers and aspirational Australians who want to have their own property, they'd be wringing their hands in frustration that you should say, oh, nothing to see here, it's an internal Liberal Party squabble. It's not. Eventually, some people will go to jail, I have no doubt. There's already one person who broke the law by disclosing a secret ICAC meeting to other people. Now, that's punishable by 12 months in jail. That's...
Funny how that never applies to the leaks, though.
Well, exactly, but
media leaks.
So I just think, Mr. Abbott, I've disagreed with him, and there's one matter that I disagree with him vehemently at the moment. But I've disagreed with him on a number of fronts, but I've admired him. And it's good to disagree with people because I'm not always right, he's not always right. But in this particular case, as the president of the Federal Liberal Party, to pull this card out and say, oh, it's about not liking people from right-wing Christian groups, not liking people. It's about people accepting money from someone they shouldn't have taken money from, allegedly.
Yeah, just a reminder, these are all allegations, and the ICAC is conducting hearings at the moment. No one's been charged. I want to turn to the economy. I mean, home values plummeting to their lowest level since 2022 during the midst of the global pandemic. And the clearance rates. I mean, we talk about this every week, Ray, because we're on a Monday after the weekend, and just no properties not selling at the moment. The government has ruined the property market and the economy.
Well, 5 people have gone into print in the Daily Telegraph to enunciate this, and we're talking about people involved in real estate, we're talking about people involved in finance, and they say, yes, increasing interest rates are playing a role, but the most significant thing that's happened is capital gains tax and negative gearing. And because the government, and we've spoken about it before, installed this 5% deposit scheme, it means that there are many people, young and old, who've bought apartments and houses now, who are in negative equity. In other words, they paid $1 million in Sydney or $800,000 in Queensland for a home, and they owe $925,000 in New South Wales, and the place is now worth $875,000.
So if they sold, I mean, they'd be at a loss.
Well, they wouldn't be at a loss because the government has guaranteed any losses to the building, to the banks.
Well, but beyond the deposit, they'd still be at a loss.
Well, and then they've got to go and find somewhere else to live, the poor people.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm sick of the Treasurer and the Prime Minister not accepting responsibility and blindly going on with this. And of course, they got it through because the Greens acquiesced to a request and they've made other changes to the NDIS.
Yeah.
And this is Anthony Albanese, who told another bald-faced lie when he said, I won't deal with the Greens on these issues. Well, of course he will. And that's the other frustrating part. I noticed that Pauline Hanson had said, these ISIS men returning, we've got to stop them. They're very bad people. And she wrote to Angus Taylor. He came out in the papers and said, yes, I agree. But he hasn't responded to her formally. I mean, it's not a coalition. It's just like-minded people saying these blokes should not be here. Whether they can get it through Parliament's another matter. But Angus, pull your finger out, please.
This is one important issue to work with Pauline on, stopping the return on the ISIS fighters, that's for sure. Just to end on a totally different topic, Ray, I mean, you used to go kind of up against both Carl Stefanovic and Kyle Sandilands. They both got sacked from their respective jobs.
I know how they feel. I got sacked in 2000.
You didn't get sacked.
Yeah, TUE sacked me.
Oh, in 2000.
That's how I went to 2GB. So I know, I feel their pain. I was about their age back then when it happened too. But look, one of the things that, and I like both the blokes. I know Carl better than I know Kyle. But, they're starting this new thing and I think, it's hard to remember.
They went on each other's
Carl and
show
Kyle went to
last
the
night.
podcast and then Kyle's starting a new one on Monday. They'll rely heavily on subscriptions because they're both tainted by this group known as the Mad Witches. There's a rather unpleasant expression in relation to the Mad Witches. But they're a very powerful group. They're very, very powerful. So they'll really struggle to get advertisers, both of them, because they're being targeted by these people. And so they'll rely upon subscriptions. Look, I wish them the best of luck, both of them. But I think it's going to be a very hard job because they've been backed, as I've mentioned to you before, in Kyle's case by a large media organisation, ARN, before that Southern Cross, and in Carl's case, he's been backed by Channel 9. And now they don't have that support.
I mean, to make the millions of dollars that they were earning from subscription is going to be a very difficult prospect.
Yeah, when you've only got 26 million, we're not the United States of America or Europe. I mean, it's very hard to get a quid out of podcasts and the rest of it in this country, particularly without advertising support.
Yeah. Ray, thank you so much. My favourite hour of the week.
We have a bit of fun, don't we?
We'll see you next Monday.
All the best. Bye-bye.
All right, still to come. Donald Trump threatened the biggest attack on Iran since World War II, but called it off. Plus, why the US government is worried about bad actors getting hold of their top AI. That's with Russell Pillemer after the break. Welcome back. Well, the US government has been highly concerned about Anthropic's powerful new AI models, Mythos 5 and Fable 5, from being exploited by bad actors such as hostile foreign nationals. And the government even banned every foreign national from accessing these powerful new AI models back in June, and they only lifted this fairly recently when the company developed national security safeguards. And joining me to discuss is Pengana Capital Chief Executive Russell Pillemer. Russ, great to see you again.
Great to see you.
So what's the national security concern around AI?
So these models are extremely powerful, and what they're particularly good at doing is breaking codes. Mythos is really good at breaking into computers, and there was a real scare that if Mythos is available to bad actors, basically every or almost every computer in the world could be vulnerable to a break-in. So what the US government did is they said you're not allowed to export it. They did subsequently, after a few weeks, allow Fable, which is a watered-down version of Mythos, to be exported, but Mythos is still quite tightly held. It's an issue, but not nearly as big an issue as what is about to come. And the reason for this is that these AI models are getting more and more powerful every year. In fact, it's estimated that they doubled in power every year.
That's amazing.
So if you think about the maths of that, next year they're twice as powerful, the next year 4 times, the next year 8 times, etc. In 5 years, they'll be 30 times as powerful as they are today. So if the government's worried about today's models, they should be frantic about what the models will look like in the future.
I mean, I wonder if the US government is already using them in warfare against Iran. If not, they probably should be, that's for sure.
I'm sure they're using all these models and all the capabilities.
Especially given the comments by JP Morgan Chief Executive Jamie Dimon.
Yeah, well, Jamie Dimon made an interesting comment. He was one of those people that had actually looked at the inside of Mythos. There's certain people who had inside access.
Yeah.
And he made the comment that it's so powerful, it's akin to giving individuals access to ballistic missiles. So I guess he's obviously overstating the point, but just that these are really powerful things and they shouldn't fall into the wrong hands.
Into the wrong hands, like hostile foreign nations, Iran, Russia, China, etc. Now, Elon Musk made headlines recently when he spoke about money becoming meaningless under AI. He was speaking about the age of abundance and products becoming cheaper. But how does this actually work, and especially the time frame, 10 years?
Yeah, so I think Elon Musk always overstates things. He gets the headlines, and sometimes he does it because it's good for his businesses. So he owns one of the largest robotics companies in the world. It's actually part of Tesla. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but Tesla is more a robotics company today than it is a car manufacturer. So the theory behind this is that if you have unlimited manpower and unlimited brain power, you put the two together, you have an ability to create really, really cheap goods and services. And in the world today with robotics and robots, you've got all the manpower you need. Elon Musk reckons that within 5 years, there could be up to 1 billion robots operational in the world.
That everyone will have their own personal
Everyone will have their own personal one. But these robots are amazingly smart. They're obviously amazingly strong. They're all AI enabled, and they don't need to rest. You can take them, they don't need to eat, don't need to drink. And so they can work 24/7, do the types of jobs that humans just can't do. So this could create an age of abundance. If you think about this in the agricultural industry, you could solve world hunger, for instance, with these types of capabilities. So it's really an interesting era we live in.
Super quickly before we go, there's been a lot of discussion about the SpaceX stock falling since its IPO price. Why do you think this is?
So I think markets very often overreact on the upside and overreact on the downside. So I don't think SpaceX as a company really has, its inherent value hasn't changed since it had listed. But the market got super excited on the listing and bid it up way too much. And then people start to get panicked and it's too high and then start selling, and probably it's down below where it should be at the moment. Now, SpaceX is an interesting company because it's got great value potential, but the value potential is actually quite long term. So you're not seeing the results straight away, so you have to have a little bit of imagination.
Hold it for a very long time.
Yeah, it's a long hold. So I think people should be buying these things in moderation and really putting their heads down and holding for the long term, provided the underlying company doesn't change too much in what it's doing and its prospects.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Russ. Appreciate it.
Great to see you.
All right, still to come, Donald Trump has backed off from further strikes in Iran after threatening to launch the biggest attack since World War II. Plus, RFK Jr. loses his cool on live TV at the CNN. That's next. Well, US President Donald Trump called off a massive attack on Iran after several US allies in the Gulf appealed to him to stand down and make a deal. He seems confident that a resolution will come through.
I think there's a deal. There's a deal on Hormuz, and then there will be a deal on the nuclear, or you might call it the denuclearization of Iran. I call it the denuclearization of Iran.
And News24 contributor Kosha Garda joins me now. I mean, Kosha, it's so hard to believe that there'll be a deal. What's the latest?
You know, I was counting, it's been 5 months, Sharri, since the strikes were launched on February 28th. And I think this is the 5th cycle, this rinse and repeat cycle of threats, military action, more escalatory threats, some sort of very fragile ceasefire and hopes of a deal, and then back we are again. The only thing I would say is that when the nations in the region, the Gulf states, Israel and Iran, have more skin in the game, are the ones at the table, at the negotiating table, actually getting into the details, it feels like there'll be a little bit of a higher chance of something happening because it's in their backyard. It's very proximate to them versus when the U.S. is trying to do it from afar. So hopefully this is happening. I know it was precipitated by more escalatory rhetoric from Iran that they're going to attack Saudi Arabia's oil production facilities. Vice versa, the U.S. reportedly attacked or back-channeled that they would attack energy production facilities in Iran. So that kind of rhetoric makes everybody scared, of course, but sometimes it can be helpful to get people to the table and get them to make concessions on both sides and try to put some sort of stability in place, as fragile as it may be.
Although Trump makes those threats so often, I don't know if Iran's believing him anymore, but anyway. I want to move on to Robert F.K. Jr., Trump's Human Services Secretary. He lost his cool. There was a bit of a fiery clash with CNN reporter Dana Bash. Have a look.
Talk about something that you have no personal knowledge of.
Okay, well, guess what? That is my job, to talk to people.
Your job is to
Am I
tell the
allowed
truth
to talk?
to the American
yes,
public.
Yes, and my job
And
is
to
to
be-
get as
and
much
to-
information as I can.
And to maintain
what we were doing,
a posture
what we were
of
doing,
fierce skepticism
what we
toward
were
government
doing
authority.
in.
And it went on. And Kosha, this was, he was saying they failed to challenge public health authorities during the pandemic.
You know, whenever people are talking past each other, maybe doesn't make for the best television for the audience, but the big picture, I would say good for him. You really can't go wrong on this dimension. There was dereliction of duty up and down, all political and power structures, I should say, including the media, official government channels. You know this better than anybody. And we haven't really had full accountability. We never may. We've chipped around the edges a little bit, and you've got to keep doing that. So whenever these combative discussions take place, I think you do inch a little bit closer to some sort of reckoning. The press did play a big role. RFK Jr. himself was really in the crosshairs for them. He was completely deplatformed from all of social media. Other outlets like CNN and others completely were very negative and critical of his positions. And I think the record shows that he was not all wrong at least wanting to have some sort of dissent out there. And I think she was trying to go micro, that what would you do for future pandemic, practical steps. And he was trying to go macro, which is that maintaining our civil liberties, allowing dissenting opinions, being very skeptical of authority figures are good things, and you should not let a pandemic in the future squash them. And I think we all saw what happens when they do.
Yeah, and broadly, CNN, along with most of the left media, was a total embarrassment during the pandemic. Just finally, Kosha, look, Trump was criticised for playing golf in the middle of the Iranian war. I mean, the Iranian war, as you said, has gone on for 5 months. He's not meant to play golf for 5 months. But then anyway, he actually shut down his critics when he scored an impressive 70.
Yes, he will always be criticized. And this has been a long trend. People used to criticize Ronald Reagan for sleeping too much, and on it goes for what they do. He has been pushing back against critics, saying that he probably couldn't even finish his 18 holes, and his general health and mental and physical levels of vigor. And I think, whenever he does well, he was, I think, 70, 2 below par. He's not going to let that one slide. So he definitely stuck it back to them.
Yeah, did well. All right, Kosha, great to see you as always. And thanks for your company tonight. I'll see you 8 o'clock tomorrow. And here's Paul Murray.